In a crowded courtroom, the stern judge, seated in his wheelchair, was about to convict a poor father for a crime he swore he did not commit. Just then, the accused daughter, a 7-year-old girl, stood up, walked toward the judge, and said in a firm voice, "Release my dad, and I will make you walk again." The room erupted in laughter until something extraordinary happened, and the laughter gave way to silence. That gray morning, the city courthouse felt more like a cathedral of silence. The high walls, lined with rows of aged books, bore witness to decades of relentless trials. In the center, wrapped in a thick black robe, Judge Samuel Wright remained motionless in his wheelchair. It had been 15 years since the car accident that left him this way, an instant of twisted metal and muffled screams that silenced his legs and gradually everything else. Since then, he had become a symbol of rigor and coldness. Those who entered knew that with Samuel, there was no appeal to emotion. Before him, with his hands clasped in his lap, sat David Thompson, a man with a restless gaze and features marked by the fatigue of someone living on the edge. A worker and single father, he was accused of armed robbery at a neighborhood pharmacy. The evidence against him was solid: security camera footage, eyewitness identification, location records. Still, his eyes pleaded for something more, perhaps true justice. Sitting behind him, a slender girl observed everything with her chin resting on her hands. She wore a faded blue dress and worn-out sneakers. Her name was Lily, and she was only 7 years old. Judge Wright flipped through the last documents of the case with precise, almost surgical movements. The room was filled with reporters, family members, and police officers. The sound of his pen tapping against the wood of his bench resonated like a countdown clock. Samuel lifted his gaze. Before proceeding with the reading of the final verdict, he said slowly, "Does anyone present wish to add something relevant to the case?" No hands were raised. Silence prevailed until, like an unexpected spark, a fine, clear, and determined voice resonated in the room. "I want to." Everyone turned. Little Lily was already standing, stepping out of the row where she had been seated. A murmur swept through the atmosphere. Samuel frowned, intrigued. The girl walked to the center of the room with short but firm steps. "I am David's daughter," she said, stopping in front of the bench. "And I have something to say before you make a mistake." One of the officers tried to intervene, but the judge raised his hand slightly. His impatient eyes pierced through her as if trying to disarm her. "You have 2 minutes, child, and I hope you know what you are doing." Lily took a deep breath, clenching her fists at her sides. "Free my dad, and I will make you walk again." The courtroom seemed to freeze in time. The whisper of surprise was immediate, followed by some stifled laughter. Samuel did not laugh. He hardened his jaw. "That is blackmail," he shot back. "Because it sounds exactly like emotional blackmail from a desperate child." She held his gaze. "It's not blackmail, it's a promise." The judge leaned forward, squinting his eyes. "Listen well, this is a court and I follow the law. What you are suggesting is impossible. Nonsense. My paralysis is irreversible, and this trial is not a place for childish tricks." "But you are not here just to follow papers, are you?" she replied with surprising firmness. "You are here to do what is right." Samuel tightened his grip on the arms of his chair. What is right is in the law, and the law demands evidence, facts, structure, not emotional tricks, not invented miracles. The girl stepped forward. "Then let me prove it. Not everything, just a little, enough for you to understand that you can choose true justice." His gaze faltered for a moment. This is a court, not a stage, he thought, annoyed. But something in those words prevented him from closing the matter. The room filled with expectation and tension, as if thunder were about to strike inside. Samuel, though skeptical, did not respond. Something in his chest, perhaps anger, perhaps curiosity, prevented him from putting an end to it. Lily took another slow step forward. The entire courtroom was watching. She stopped right in front of the judge's wheelchair, her hands clasped together. The judge looked at her with narrowed eyes, as if trying to discern whether this was madness or something more. "Give me the chance to show it." "A small chance," whispered Samuel. He did not say yes, but he did not say no either. The silence that fell over the courtroom was thick as fog. Lily, still kneeling in front of the judge's wheelchair, placed her small hands on the judge's immobile knees. Her palms trembled slightly, but her expression was one of absolute concentration. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to murmur. Soft words that seemed like whispers from the heart. A sweet, rhythmic babble, without liturgical form, but loaded with raw, sincere feeling. The sound seemed to penetrate the invisible armor of Samuel, who kept his eyes hard, trying to ignore that childish gesture. The girl squeezed her eyes tighter, as if fighting against an invisible pain. She whispered with faith, her fingers lightly pressed against the judge's skin, while her knees touched the cold marble. For a moment, no one dared to laugh until a sarcastic cough broke the atmosphere. "Come on, miracle girl, make him dance," a man at the back mocked, provoking the first laughs. Lily remained still as if she did not hear. Samuel remained impassive. Inside, he wanted to end this once and for all, but something in him hesitated. An ancient part of him desperately wished she was right. 2 minutes passed, the whispers ceased. Lily, still kneeling, lifted her face and looked at him. Hopeful, vulnerable. Her eyes searched for some sign, a tremor, a gesture. But Samuel merely raised an eyebrow slowly and let out a dry laugh. "Is that all?" he said with disdain. "A childish performance. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but as expected, nothing happened." His laughter opened the door to the cruelty of others. The courtroom erupted in laughter. "The miracle expired," shouted a young man. A woman whispered, "Poor thing, she's going to be traumatized forever." David, the father, squirmed in his seat. He tried to stand but was stopped by the guard beside him. "Lily, sweetheart, don't listen to them." His shout resonated above the noise. The girl, now standing with tears filling her eyes, looked around completely lost. Her attempt to help had turned into mockery. She tried to breathe, but the knot in her throat was stronger. Samuel adjusted his glasses, cleared his throat, and resumed his usual coldness. "Let's restore order. This is a court, and we have a sentence to fulfill." He took the sheet, took a deep breath, and with a firm, relentless voice declared, "David Thompson is sentenced to 10 years in prison in a closed regime." The girl couldn't take it anymore. She ran out of the courtroom, pushing past the arms of those in her way. The laughter chased her like cruel echoes. "Are you going to perform another miracle, girl?" they mocked. Tears streamed down her face as she left the courtroom, stumbling over her own steps. David shouted again, but was restrained. The slam of the door closing was like a brutal period. Samuel, despite his hardened face, felt a strange pressure in his chest. "It's better this way," he thought. "The law is the law." The feeling does not weigh on the hammer of justice, and yet something did not fit. Seconds passed, the murmur continued, but Samuel felt a slight nausea. He placed his hand on his stomach, shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and then, subtly, a warmth. A faint tingling began to spread through his right calf, something he hadn't felt in 15 years. "It's not psychological, suggestion, hallucination," he repeated, but the tingling increased, rising. It was as if some ancient force were blowing life into the dead nerves. His hand gripped the armrest of the chair tightly. The courtroom was still laughing, but he no longer heard anything. The tingling became warmth, burning, pulse, a real heartbeat in his legs. Samuel's eyes widened. He tried to hide it, but now his breathing was rapid, he was sweating, and then, without thinking, he pushed the armrests of the chair and forced his body forward. His feet planted on the ground. With a trembling effort, he stood up slowly at first, then higher, until he was completely upright. The room fell silent one by one. Everyone turned to see the judge, motionless, supported only by an invisible miracle. No one dared to say anything. For 5 seconds, the world stopped, and then his body faltered, like a castle crumbling from within. His legs gave way, and Samuel fell heavily back into the chair. The thud echoed on the marble floor. He tried to stand again, but now everything was as it had been before, cold, lifeless, immobile. He looked at his own legs in fear. "I was standing. I felt it," he murmured, unable to find logic. The crowd did not know what to say. The mockery had vanished. Only an unsettling silence remained, as if everyone had witnessed something that could not be explained. The judge's eyes searched for the door through which Lily had exited. She said it was just a test. He remembered. His voice trembled. For the first time in years, he had no certainty. He was facing something that escaped reason, something he had perhaps forgotten in all his rigor, faith. And although he remained seated, although he had no control over his legs once again, he knew. That girl had spoken the truth. The day dawned cloudy, as if the very sky did not know what to feel. Inside the car, Samuel watched through the window as the streets passed slowly, his hands trembling as they gripped the arms of his wheelchair. Since the courtroom episode, he could think of nothing else. Those 5 seconds of standing had stripped him of everything he believed immutable, feeling his legs again and losing them once more. It was like being thrown back into darkness after seeing the light for a moment. But what resonated most within him was the question he tried to avoid. Why did it last so little? Upon arriving at the shelter, he was met with distrustful looks. A judge always meant trouble. But that morning, he did not seem threatening. There was something in his gaze, a new weight. They led him to the patio, where Lily was alone, sitting under a tree, tearing pieces of paper and letting them fly with the wind. Upon seeing him, she did not react. She kept her eyes on the ground. Samuel stopped his chair a few meters away. Lily spoke in a voice lower than she would have liked. "I need to talk to you." She looked up but said nothing. Samuel hesitated for a moment, then spoke. "Yesterday, for a few seconds, I walked." Lily nodded slowly without surprise, "But then I lost it all. It was as if it had been ripped away from me." The judge looked at his hands nervously. "You said it was a test, but why only 5 seconds?" The girl pressed her lips together, took a deep breath, and replied firmly, "Because you did not do what was right. God would never keep someone standing who commits injustice." Samuel's eyes widened in surprise. "Injustice," he repeated, almost offended. "I followed the evidence, I applied the law." The girl approached slowly, looking him directly in the eyes. "The law of paper, not the law of the heart." He frowned, confused. "What do you mean by that?" Lily pulled out a small USB drive protected with blue tape from her pocket. It had been hidden behind the neighbor's television. "My dad installed a camera when they started robbing houses on the street. He recorded that night. I was sick and he was taking care of me at the exact time of the crime." Samuel took the device with trembling hands. "Does it have audio?" he asked. She nodded. "You can hear my cough. You can hear when he says he will miss work to stay with me. He couldn't have robbed that pharmacy, he was home with me." The judge took a deep breath, as if something inside him shattered in silence. No one saw this. Lily shook her head. The police didn't even want to listen. They threw everything away. For several seconds, the judge remained silent, staring at the small object. There, in that simple thing, was the line that separated error from repair. "You were right," he murmured without looking at the girl. She sat beside him, hugging her knees. "It's not about being right," she said almost in a whisper. "It's about doing what is right." Samuel closed his eyes. "And what if it's too late?" The girl replied without hesitation, "If you try, it will never be too late." The judge looked at her with a mixture of astonishment and respect. That girl, that little one, spoke with a wisdom that broke down walls within him. "I will reopen the case," he finally said. "But I can't do it alone." Lily looked at him intently. "And what can I do?" He smiled slightly for the first time. "Help me be my eyes, my ears, my conscience." The proposal sounded absurd, but at that moment it made more sense than anything he had done in years. Lily hesitated but nodded. "Okay, but only if I can go where you go." Samuel extended his hand. "Deal." They shook hands like two unlikely partners, a man in a robe and a girl in a faded blue dress. Two lives that should never have crossed paths. Now they walked in the same direction. As they left, Samuel felt a slight pinch in his legs. But maybe there's still time, he thought. Lily walked beside him with short but determined steps. The shelter was left behind, and ahead lay a case to reopen, an injustice to undo, And perhaps a miracle still to finish. What began with faith now continued with evidence, but within both of them was something new, a partnership. The desk was covered with papers, photos, and documents printed in black and white. Among them was the USB drive Lily had given him, now connected to an old laptop. The recording was clear, showing David preparing soup, placing cool cloths on his daughter's forehead, and murmuring, "You have to get better, little one. I'm not going to leave you." With each replay of the video, Samuel tensed less. His focus was no longer just legal. There was something more there, an emotional restlessness he didn't know how to name. Lily, sitting beside him, observed everything in silence. She asked no questions, just watched. But when Samuel sighed for the 5th time in less than a minute, she dared to speak. "Were you always this serious?" The judge looked up, surprised. "What do you mean?" She shrugged. "I don't know. You seem like you were born old." The phrase was said with the cruel naturalness of children. Samuel blinked twice and let out a low laugh that took him by surprise. She opened her eyes wide. "What? You know how to laugh?" He feigned a cough. "Sometimes, but normally not during work hours." She replied with a mischievous smile, "We're also working on making you smile, you know?" Throughout the afternoon, amidst files and reports, she asked unexpected questions. "Did you ever have a cat? When you were a child, did you like to run?" With each provocation, an internal wall crumbled. Samuel tried to maintain composure, but his eyes began to soften, and occasionally a smile escaped involuntarily, sincerely. Lily pretended to take notes in an invisible notebook every time he smiled. "Another point for the Joy team," she said. It was a silent war against years of rigidity, and she was winning without raising her voice. At one point, she pointed to an old photo of the judge hanging on the wall, a portrait of him still standing in his robe before the accident. "You looked happy there." He stared at the image for long seconds before responding. "I was busy and proud." The girl tilted her head. "But that's not the same as being happy, right?" Samuel fell silent. That had touched him deeper than he wanted to admit. No, it wasn't. And without quite knowing why, he began to recount the accident, the chronic pain, the distancing from friends, the coldness he adopted as armor. Lily listened with attentive eyes. "And you think you became this way because you could no longer walk?" Samuel reflected. "I think I also stopped walking inside." She moved a little closer, as if giving space for a bird to perch on her shoulder. "Then let's start walking again, but this time inside first." The judge laughed a brief, almost awkward laugh, but he did not deny it. In fact, part of him wanted more of those conversations, those judgment-free glances. It was as if every phrase from the girl slowly cleaned the dusty corners of his soul. Between one declaration and another, Lily insisted on interrupting with things that had nothing to do with the case. "If you were an animal, what would you be?" He rolled his eyes. "A silent, observant hawk." She laughed. "I think you'd be an armadillo. You curl up when you're scared." Samuel looked at her, then laughed again. "Okay, maybe an armadillo in a robe." That once cold and austere room was beginning to resemble something he hadn't seen in years, a place with life. And no matter how much he tried to convince himself that the focus was on David's case, Samuel knew something else was happening. His thoughts were no longer just about laws and penal codes. He began to wonder simple things, almost forgotten. What was my favorite color as a child? What made me laugh before the robe? And all of that because of a girl who, instead of fearing the stern judge, chose to confront him with sincere questions and the courage to love, even after being humiliated by him. At the end of the day, as they gathered the papers, Lily casually commented, "You know what I think? You're not getting better just because of the miracle. You're getting better because you're letting good things in again." Samuel did not respond. He just looked at her for a few seconds with a slight smile on his lips and an almost emotional gaze. Something was changing, and perhaps, just perhaps, it was the beginning of a deeper healing than the physical one. A healing that could not be seen but felt, and that was born there in silence. The following days were filled with piles of papers, cold coffee, and hours of intense silence. Samuel and Lily had transformed the judge's office into a true research center. While she organized the documents by date and relevance, he immersed himself in expert reports, statements, and police records. His trained eyes scanned each line with precision, and it was there, between one page and another of the original process, that Samuel stopped. A small detail, almost imperceptible. Officer Henry's report, the police officer who had arrested David, had been protocolized a day before the formal collection of evidence. He remained still. This doesn't make sense. Holding the sheet between his fingers, Samuel read it again, this time aloud. It describes the crime scene with details that would only be visible after an expert examination. And that was delivered before the examination was conducted. The tension in the air was palpable. Samuel leaned back in his chair, pressing his temples with his fingers. Either he has powers of divination, or someone is lying big time. Later, Samuel pulled out a folder he had archived years ago with parallel notes on officer conduct, and there was Henry's name marked in at least 3 internal incidents, one for coercion of witnesses, another for loss of evidence, and a third, more serious, for suspicion of planting evidence. All archived, without thorough investigation. "He's more than a police officer," Samuel murmured. "He's a wolf in uniform." In the corridors of the department, Henry was known for his explosive temper, his coldness with the accused, and above all, for his ability to silence anyone who dared to question him. Samuel sat up a little in his chair, still without strength in his legs, as if his body responded to indignation. That man set it all up and no one wanted to see it. Lily in silence watched him. She knew the judge was not speaking only as an authority, he was speaking as someone who was beginning to awaken to the truth. "We're going to need a reconsideration hearing." Lily, who was holding a huge binder on her lap, looked at him intently. "Does that mean you're going to change the sentence?" He nodded. "If it is proven that there was fraud, I can annul the conviction." That same day, Samuel drafted the formal request for reopening. When he delivered the document to the court secretary, silence settled in. Shortly after, the judge was called to the office of a veteran prosecutor, someone he had known since university days. The room was dark, with the blinds half open. "Are you sure about what you're doing, Samuel?" The voice was too calm, dangerously calm. "Absolutely." The other stood up slowly. "Reopening a case with a recent sentence based on the fragile claims of a girl is professional suicide." Samuel did not respond immediately, he just looked at him. The prosecutor stepped forward. "You're really going to throw away everything you built because of a little girl who appeared out of nowhere saying she can make you walk?" There was poison in the words, but also fear. "That girl has seen more truth than you and I combined in 30 years of robes," Samuel replied firmly. "You don't know what I felt." The other smiled sideways. "No, but I know it's going to cost you dearly, very dearly." The judge turned, already at the door. "Then prepare the bill. I will pay it." In the car, on the way home, Samuel stared out the window, his face tense. The veiled threat still echoed in his ears, but something stronger was beating in his chest, the memory. That moment, though brief, when his legs responded, remained etched in his body. The girl's faith had left a sacred scar, a discreet flame that now fueled his courage. He closed his eyes for a moment. It was no longer just about David. It was above all about the system and about proving that true justice could still exist. Lily was waiting for him on the courthouse steps, sitting with a worn backpack on her lap. When she saw him, she ran to the car door. "Well, we did it." Samuel got out with the help of the chauffeur and simply said, "We're in, new hearing in 4 days." The girl smiled victoriously. "So now you're like a superhero in a tie, right?" The judge rolled his eyes. "Don't exaggerate." But inside, something in him was also smiling. She was naming things he didn't know how to name, and little by little, his heart was beginning to believe. Night fell silently over the city, but inside the small rented house where Samuel and Lily had taken refuge, something weighed in the air, a premonition. The closed curtains muffled the sounds of the street, and the dim lamps cast elongated shadows on the walls. Seated at the table, the judge reviewed the last documents of the complaint against Henry, while the girl, sitting on the floor with open folders around her, read quietly, focused. The only constant sound was the kitchen clock, but there was something strange that night, an unnatural silence, as if danger were just waiting for the right moment to knock on the door. Then came the crack, a dry noise outside. The judge looked up alert. "Did you hear that?" he murmured. Lily stopped, frightened. "It sounds like someone is back there." She stood up slowly, walking toward the window, but before she could peek, the back door was violently kicked in. The wooden frame flew off. Samuel turned sharply in his chair, completely defenseless, and then the figure appeared, Henry, with a feverish gaze, a sweaty face, and a gun in hand, a loose monster. "The game is over, Judge." Time froze. Samuel instinctively tried to retreat with the chair, but hit the wall. His trembling hands clutched the armrests, trapped with no way out. "Henry, think about what you're doing," he said, trying to keep his voice steady, though inside his heart threatened to explode. The officer aimed the gun directly at him. "You should have kept quiet, but you had to play the hero because of a little brat." It was then that Lily appeared in the doorway. Their eyes met, then the gun, and without thinking, with a scream, she ran and threw herself at Henry. The impact took him by surprise. The gun slid across the floor. They both fell onto the carpet, and she began to scream, kicking, biting, a girl fighting with everything she had. "Don't touch him!" Samuel, terrified, shouted the girl's name, but he could do nothing. He was trapped in that chair, watching the chaos unfold before him. Henry, furious, shoved Lily hard against the wall. She stumbled but stood her ground, her chest heaving. The police officer regained the gun and aimed it again, now at both of them. "I swear this ends here," he growled, cocking the weapon. Time seemed suspended. Lily, trembling, stood in front of Samuel, as if her fragile body could protect him. "If you want to do something to him, you'll have to go through me," she said, her voice raspy with fear. Outside, no one seemed to hear. Death was there, standing in the middle of the room. It was then that, in a miracle of perfect timing, the shrill sound of sirens broke the silence like thunder. Red lights flooded through the window. Henry turned, surprised, hesitated for a second, and the front door was kicked in. "Police, drop the weapon!" shouted the officers, bursting into the house with their guns drawn. Henry froze, still with his finger on the trigger. He had no time to react. He was tackled by two officers and pinned to the ground. The gun slid away. Samuel breathed as if he had run a marathon. Lily fell to her knees, exhausted. A neighbor who had seen a man enter through the back of the house and suspected something was wrong had called the police. Luckily, a patrol was nearby and arrived immediately. Henry was handcuffed, still cursing and struggling, but this time there was no escape. A paramedic examined Lily, who seemed calmer now, though still scared. She tightly gripped the judge's hand, who said nothing, just looked at her with tear-filled eyes. After a few minutes of silence, he finally murmured, "You really saved me." The girl looked at him, her voice trembling. "And you believed in my dad when no one else did." Samuel squeezed her hand tighter. "I will never doubt you again." She smiled bravely, still breathing heavily. "So, we're even now." And there, among splintered wood, tension, and short breaths, something was born that is not written in laws nor taught in manuals. A deep, silent alliance between a man wounded by life and a girl who refused to stop fighting. The day had come. The new trial was scheduled for 9 a.m., but the courtroom was already nearly full by 8. Lawyers, journalists, family members, curious onlookers, all wanted to be present to witness the return of the Thompson case. More than that, everyone wanted to see Judge Samuel Wright. The headlines spoke of the hearing as if it were a spectacle. The judge who walked for 5 seconds, miracle or manipulation? But for those involved, it was more than news. It was justice waiting to be served. Lily arrived accompanied by David, their hands intertwined. The father looked around warily, but the girl walked with her head held high. Her light blue dress seemed more vibrant that morning. The room fell silent when the side doors opened, and there he was, Samuel Wright, standing, leaning on a cane, wearing his black robe like a silent armor. Each of his steps was a challenge to expectations, but he walked not with perfection but with dignity. And when he positioned himself in front of the court, The murmurs ceased. Everyone knew something different was about to happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the judge began with a firm voice. This hearing has been convened following the presentation of new evidence that questions the conviction of David Thompson. No emotion on his face, but those who paid attention would see something new in his eyes. A flame of certainty. The prosecution tried to contain the impact, but soon it was overwhelmed by the evidence. First, the USB drive with the images recorded inside David's house, showing that he was taking care of his daughter at the exact time of the crime. Then, the medical records and receipts omitted in the previous trial. But the final piece of evidence that sealed the fate of the case was the detailed report about the attempted assault on Samuel and Lily, an attack that occurred the night before. Videos from the precinct, medical reports, the weapon found in Henry's possession, testimonies from neighbors, photographs of the forced door. Henry, present in the courtroom, already handcuffed, maintained a tense expression but did not deny anything. The prosecutor, without arguments, publicly apologized to the defense, and Samuel, with a trembling hand, raised the sentence. In light of the evidence and the violent attempt to obstruct justice, the court declares that David Thompson is innocent of the previous charges. His conviction is annulled. The room erupted. Lily covered her mouth in shock before running to her father. He lifted her in his arms, spinning around with tears in his eyes. "You saved me," he murmured. "No, Dad," she said, looking at the judge. "He saved us too." Samuel watched the scene with a tight throat, but something was still missing. Lily slowly walked toward him. The courtroom fell silent once more. She stopped in front of the chair. "Can I?" she asked, her eyes shining. Samuel nodded. The girl knelt reverently, as if she were before something sacred. Her hands touched the judge's legs again, but now with more firmness. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and began to speak softly with an emotion that made the entire room fall silent. "I know it's hard, but if you believe now, let God finish what he started." She began to cry silently, not out of sadness but out of surrender. Her words trembled in the air like invisible incense. "For everything you did, for defending what is right, I ask that now God complete what is lacking." The girl's hands pressed gently against the judge's knees, but there was strength there, faith, trust. He trembled completely, but did not stop. "Before, you walked for a promise, now walk for the truth." This time what happened was different, slow, deep. Samuel's legs began to tingle, but it was no longer that fleeting sensation. It was as if something were awakening within him. His fingers moved, his muscles contracted, and then, without support, he stood up firmly, without a cane, without wavering. A murmur swept through the room, followed by tears, applause, and shouts. Lily smiled at him, kneeling. Samuel looked at his own legs and then at her. "It was you," he murmured. She replied simply, "It was God. I just asked well this time." The jury, the lawyers, the journalists, everyone was standing. Some applauded, others cried, but no one left unchanged. In that courtroom, where so many times justice had been just an empty name, something greater had manifested, not only in the body of the judge but in the soul of everyone present. And finally, Samuel Wright, the man of stone, looked at the girl with wet eyes and said, "Justice has been served," and for the first time in years, everyone agreed. The courtroom was left behind, literally. David and Lily exited the building without handcuffs, without uniforms, without fear, just holding hands, descending the steps in silence. Outside, the sky seemed bluer, as if it too were breathing a sigh of relief. Some people applauded them, waved at them, but they said nothing. The victory was too intimate to fit into words. They went straight home, to the simple house where it all began. Days passed, and routine slowly returned. David fixed the kitchen, hung clothes on the line. Lily drew on the floor of the living room, sketching a picture of a man in a robe and a girl in a blue dress. The title of the drawing was, "The Judge Who Walked and Smiled." They weren't expecting visitors. So when they heard the creak of the gate opening, they exchanged silent glances, and there he was, Samuel Wright. He wore a light gray jacket and carried flowers in his hands, daisies, Lily's mother's favorite. He had learned that from the documents. A A simple gesture, but it said everything. David walked to the gate with restrained steps. The two men looked at each other for long seconds, without robes between them, without hammers, without distance, just two fathers marked by different battles. Samuel extended the bouquet. It's not much, but it's what I found. David took the flowers, holding them carefully. Then he took a deep breath. Samuel looked him in the eyes and said, his voice choked but firm, David, forgive me. I failed you. I condemned you when I should have protected you. For a moment, the silence was absolute. David did not hesitate. He pressed the flowers against his chest, took a deep breath, and responded with a serenity that hurt. You came back. That's what matters. I truly forgive you with a clean heart. Those words, spoken with such humility, disarmed what remained of pain in the judge's gaze. And then something happened that seemed impossible. They embraced without words, just the gesture, a silence that did not weigh but liberated. Lily appeared at the door of the house, peeking at the scene with bright eyes. When she saw the two separate, she ran toward them and wrapped her arms around the judge's waist. I thought you weren't coming back. Samuel smiled, stroking her head. I took a while because I didn't know how to thank you. The girl pointed inside. Do you want to come in? He hesitated, then nodded. Please. And so the three entered together as if they had done it 1,000 times before, as if that moment were the starting point of a new story. In the yard, the afternoon sun painted everything golden. A light breeze blew. Lily, excited, turned on an old radio that only tuned into 2 stations and always had static. A slow song began to play, half cheesy, half beautiful. She looked at the judge with a mischievous smile. If you can walk now, you can also dance. Samuel laughed, trying to hide behind his dignity. Don't exaggerate. But she insisted, extending her hand like a solemn invitation. Just once, I promise not to record. David watched from a distance with crossed arms and a discreet smile, and Samuel accepted. With clumsy steps and a slight tremor in his knees, he took Lily's hand and spun with her in the middle of the yard. The dance was more of a stumble than a step, but the joy was real. With each turn, with each laugh, what had been broken inside them seemed to piece itself together bit by bit. Lily twirled with lightness, as if she had been born for it. Samuel, despite his rigidity, let himself be carried away. The song ended, but they remained there, spinning in silence. The sun sank on the horizon, tinting the sky orange and pink. The radio crackled on its own, and in that moment, there were no convictions, illnesses, prosecutors, or wheelchairs. There was only a girl, a father, and a man who had been saved by both. And it was no longer about justice. It was about healing, a new beginning of grace. Samuel stopped, panting with tears in his eyes. He looked at David, then at Lily. Thank you for not giving up on me. The girl approached, taking his hands. You just needed a little push. He laughed, and for the first time, he laughed heartily. And so, amidst laughter, flowers, and clumsy steps, that story ended, which was never just about laws but about faith, about second chances, about the power that only a girl has to teach a man to walk again. If you enjoyed the content, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos like this. Leave your like to support us and activate notifications so you don't miss any updates. That helps us keep creating the best for you. Until next time.